Eternity's Echo. The Last Stand of JFK, Chapter 1, The Cuban Missile Crisis unfolds on planet Earth. In this world, this reality, in a time and space known as Earth, 1962, the world stands on the brink of war. The Cuban Missile Crisis unfolds with the fate of nations hanging by a thread. But what most do not realize, what even those in power cannot fully grasp, is that this reality is one amongst countless others, a single thread in the vast tapestry of existence. Every choice, every action reverberates across an infinite number of worlds. Here in this moment, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, the President of the United States, the most powerful leader in the world, faces not just the brink of nuclear war, but the delicate balance of realities that are intertwined in ways seen and unseen. And as the clock ticks down, the world's heater's on the edge of destruction. But unknown to most, the ripples of decisions made here will echo far beyond, affecting not just this reality, but countless others. Gentlemen, we have a dire situation. The Soviets have placed nuclear missiles in Cuba. The Joint Chiefs are pushing for a strike, but that could mean a war, a nuclear war. Robert McNamara, the Secretary of Defense, says to the President with a tense voice, "Mr. President, if we don't act, we could risk losing our advantage over the Soviets, and they could hit every major city in the United States." McNamara, as the Secretary of Defense, serves as a key member of Kennedy's cabinet and one of his most trusted advisors on defense matters. He is deeply involved in shaping U.S. military policy during the Cold War. Kennedy is reflective. "I've read about the great general of ancient Carthage, Hannibal. Hannibal waged a brilliant campaign against the tyranny of Rome. He used the terrain, the element of surprise. We, too, need a strategy, one that outmaneuvers, not just overpowers." As the weight of the world presses down on him, JFK contemplates the lessons of history, seeking a path that avoids catastrophe. As option to discuss and as debates rage back and forth, JFK's mind drifts to the book he once wrote, an account about men of conviction and purpose, called Profiles in Courage. It was about leaders who faced daunting odds, dire consequences, yet stayed the course and emerged victorious. He says softly to himself, "Hannibal of Carthage. He defied Rome, led his men through the Alps with elephants. And against all odds, he outmaneuvered the mightiest empire the world had ever seen. But it wasn't just strength. It was about strategy." The meeting concludes, and now back in the Oval Office, Kennedy picks up the phone. "Hannibal planned, and we need to plan too. I need to talk with someone who planned a nuclear war, knows the ups and downs." And an aide answers, "Well, that would probably be Hugh Everett. He's a mathematical genius from Princeton." "Well, then get me Hugh Everett. I need to understand the full scope of what we're dealing with. This isn't just about Cuba. We may be playing with forces far beyond our understanding." With the presence of nuclear missiles now in Cuba, Kennedy seeks to mitigate the damage by preventing further arms from coming in. And so he comes up with the idea of erecting a blockade around the island. Days later, the blockade, mostly Navy ships, is in place. It's a line in the water. It's a test of wills amongst superpowers. A naval officer reports directly to the president. "Sir, the Soviet ships keep coming at the blockade. Soon they'll be crossing that line." And JFK, on the radio, calm and commanding, says, "Hold steady. We are not here to fire the first shot. We're here to prevent the last." And the naval officer says, "Understood, sir, but if they don't stop advancing on us, we might have to fire on them." "Oh, they'll stop moving. Trust the strategy. We're not in this to win the battle. We're in this to prevent a war." The fate of the world essentially hangs by a thread, but JFK's resolve is unwavering, drawing strength from the lessons of the past. The following morning, The president sits at the head of a meeting known as the Executive Committee. He sits with his best, surrounded by his top advisors, including Robert McNamara, Secretary of Defense, Dean Rusk, the Secretary of State, and Bobby Kennedy, his brother, and the Attorney General. Gentlemen, we've discussed the tactical and strategic implications of a nuclear exchange, but we must confront the worst-case scenario. What happens if the unthinkable occurs? What would be the extent of the damage, not just to the United States or the Soviet Union, but to the world and possibly beyond? One aide, McNamara, says, "Well, Mr. President, a full-scale nuclear exchange would result in the deaths of millions immediately. There's about 200 million souls in both the United States as well as the Soviet Union. And the collective loss of life could be catastrophic, with potentially hundreds of millions dead or dying, plus the effect it would have across the globe." And Dean Rusk, another key advisor, says solemnly, "A nuclear war is different than other wars. There's things like fallout. It would affect innocent people all over. And then there's also the possibility of a global famine. The result could last for decades." And the president's brother, Bobby Kennedy, the Attorney General, speaks up for the first time. "Jack, we've got the possibility, too, of the war extending beyond our world." And that mathematician you mentioned, Hugh Everett from Princeton, he discusses the many worlds. It's what he did at Princeton. Now he's on our planning committee. Jack nods. "Well, I've read his work, and what it says is what we do here affects all over the universe. He says what we do here casts echoes throughout all the many worlds." McNamara leans forward. "So what exactly are you saying, Mr. President?" "What I'm saying is the implications are staggering. If we trigger a nuclear war here on Earth, the damage could go far beyond Earth. It says what we do here might affect worlds, the number of which we can't even begin to calculate." And Dean Rusk leans forward saying, "Well, the American people have elected us, Mr. President, to protect them here on Earth and to worry about their fates, not the fates of other realities and worlds." "Well, it may sound like science fiction, Dean, but as leaders, we can't afford to dismiss any possibility, no matter how outlandish it may seem. The magnitude of our decisions, the magnitude of this moment, could extend far beyond what we can see or measure. We have a responsibility, not just to the people of this world, but beyond this world, to the very fabric of existence itself. We're not just facing a crisis of politics or power. We're facing a crisis of reality. And our actions here in this room, in this world, could have consequences that ripple across an infinite number of worlds. And we must act with the full weight of that knowledge. We must act in a way that takes into account the fact that our acts here on Earth, good and bad, may reverberate across many worlds, infinite worlds without end. And their fates hang in the balance as well." The stunning implications of President Kennedy's words reverberate throughout the room, perhaps throughout the world, maybe beyond it throughout the universe. And as the Cuban Missile Crisis reaches its peak, Kennedy begins to understand that the stakes are simply not confined to Earth alone. Inspired by Hugh Everett's groundbreaking insights, Kennedy realizes that the consequences of their actions could ripple across the entire universe, affecting realities far beyond their own. In this critical moment, the gravity of his decision extends into the very fabric of existence itself.